Awesome. Well, welcome to Wednesday Night Bible Study. If you don't know me, if you're watching online, I'm Hunter. Today we're going to find ourselves in Matthew 12, if you want to flip there. So this is where Jesus rebukes the Pharisees. He proclaims himself as Lord of the Sabbath. And so when you flip there, if I can get two people to read, one person to read Matthew 12, 1 to 8, and one person to read Matthew 12, 9 to 14.
One to 8.
Matthew 12, 1 to 8.
Okay. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." But he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the showbread which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless, for the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath."
Awesome. And then can someone else read verses 9 to 14?
Going on from that place, he went into their synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus, they asked him, "Is it lawful to kill on the Sabbath?" He said to them, "If any of you has a sheep and it falls into the pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath."
To 14, yeah.
Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he stretched it out, and it was completely restored, just as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus.
Awesome. Thank you. So what's the Pharisees' problem with Jesus? Well, yeah, that is a big one. So one of the problems here specifically is that they were perceiving violations against the Sabbath law. They thought that Jesus was breaking one of the 10 commandments, and so they wanted to stop him from doing so. But what exactly was the Sabbath law, and why did it seem like Jesus and the disciples had broken them? And then from that, what is the lesson for today? So when we refer to Sabbath or Shabbat in Hebrew, you might hear somebody refer to it as Shabbat. The word itself simply means to cease work and to rest, right? Easy enough. And so this isn't my story, but I heard of a man who went to Israel just a little while ago, and it was during the Shabbat, and he was staying in one of the hotels, and as he came to understand, one of the rules during Shabbat was that you weren't allowed to kindle a fire. Why would that matter if he was staying in a hotel? He's not going to light one in the lobby. Well, potentially. So he gets on this elevator to go to his room, and he's up on one of the top floors, and he gets in the elevator, and more people get on. So what do? You kind of shuffle to the back so that more people can get on. And then, of course, you can't reach your buttons. And so once everyone is in, he just says, "Oh, hey, can you push my floor button?" And everyone just smiles and nods at him. And he says, "Okay, maybe they don't speak English." So he tries again in Hebrew. And, they just, right? He's like, "Okay, whatever then." And so the elevator goes up one floor. The doors open. Nobody gets off. The doors close. The elevator goes up to the second floor. Doors open. Nobody gets off. Nobody gets on. The doors close. You go to the third floor. Finally, some people get on, some people get off. The doors close. And all the way up until he's up at his floor. And so what he came to realize is that in Israel, every hotel has an elevator that during the Sabbath, they're programmed to hit every floor so that you don't have to push a button. What? Exactly, yeah. Yeah, when you push a button, you're generating an electrical spark. Or in other words, you're kindling a fire, right? You're breaking the Sabbath law. And when doing so, you're jeopardizing your intended rest, right?
You good for a lazy guy.
Yeah, right. So to save you from having to do any extra work on the Sabbath, all for the sake of efficiency, it just hits every floor for you. It's very restful.
So is that still today?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. You're not allowed to kindle a fire on the Sabbath.
But you know, doesn't Jesus say that the Pharisees don't do animals use for water on Sunday then?
Well, we're going to get into a little bit of the hypocrisy there, yeah. But yes, like there's a little bit of a double standard sometimes. So yeah, you probably do see the irony in this rule, right? And unfortunately, what was intended to be for our own well-being, to cease work and rest, it's been completely policed with rules and regulations that actually make it more of a hassle at times for some, or even completely ignored by others. Others don't participate in the Sabbath at all. So what was the Sabbath actually intended to look like? Well, as we'll see, it was meant for both of our physical and our spiritual well-being. So let's go to Genesis 2, 1 to 3. If someone wants to read that. Genesis 2, 1 to 3.
Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. And by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had done. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done.
Awesome. Thank you, Jane. So, did God need to rest? No. No. We believe that God is omnipotent, meaning he is all powerful. And so, no, God didn't need to take a break because he was tired. Instead, when it says that he rested, which is the Hebrew word there is the same word that we get for Sabbath, it simply means that he ceased his work to enjoy, to celebrate, and to reflect on what he had done. That's it. It's not like God needed a breather. God is, he's all powerful. This was not a difficult task. He just wanted to reflect and celebrate what he had just done. So for us, even if we think we can work every single day to no end, which is unfortunately, that's just the Western way sometimes is, if we have a 9 to 5 or we have a full-time job and then we also have a side hustle to make extra money because money is king, not Jesus. Unfortunately, right? That's the American dream. Even if we think that we can work to no end, for our spiritual well-being, God sets an example to pause, to reflect, and enjoy on what God has done. So let me ask the room, if you guys want to throw out some of your ideas. Following God's example, what should Sabbath look like if we're concerned with our spiritual well-being? What are some things that we could do? Yeah, right.
I think number one is be with the family of God on the Sabbath.
Totally.
Like I know people can make time for work and stuff or you can arrange some schedules, but I think part of it is being together with fellowship on Sunday, Sabbath.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a huge one. Charles, you got one? Chill? Yeah, we can certainly chill. Yeah. Yeah. Any other ideas? You can what?
Or take a chill pill.
You can also take a chill pill. What else? If you're concerned for your spiritual well-being, we can chill. We can spend time with God's people. Yeah. Yeah. Spending time in the Word, 100%. Yeah, Abby?
But you would think that's something we can do too, right?
Totally. But sometimes there's, when you're doing it specifically for rest, sometimes throughout the week, you're reading or you're spending time with God to give out sometimes. Whereas on Sabbath, we're more so doing it so we can be filled. Yeah. Yeah, it's spiritual and physical. And I mean, we 100%, we should still be, spending time in prayer, spending time in the Word throughout the week. It's like maybe, I don't know, if I spend time with Macy and we hang out, we hang out every week. But if I never intentionally set time aside and take her on a proper date, that relationship will suffer. Yeah.
So how about like serving someone on a Sunday, like if you went to a church, to a hospital or like you know what I mean? Like
I do know what you mean.
I was relating this to Jesus healing the people in the church, right?
Yeah.
He was doing that on the Sabbath, and he healed a few people on the Sabbath. So
Yeah. So let's hold that thought. We'll put that on the back burner for now. We'll come back to it in maybe half an hour or so.
I think it is North Americans, our busyness in our mind, like people pleasing and pleasing God with our good works. That's us being busy trying to prove our effort or our value to God or value to other people so that they care about us, or so that God is pleased with us, or so that even we're pleased with our performance and our ability to perform for God or other people, which would be like healing someone on the Sabbath would be considered, which is why he gets in trouble for that by the Pharisees.
Sure.
But I think for us to rest is doing the opposite of performance or God pleasing or people pleasing or doing things, being able to sit with God and feel the things that we're avoiding God dealing with in us is a way of resting with God.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%.
About spending time with family, life.
Sure. 100%. Yeah. No, for sure. Spending time with whoever brings you that life, especially if they're God's people. I'll just list off some other ones. We can spend time in prayer. We spend time in worship. Perhaps we can take a walk in nature and enjoy God's creation. Perhaps there's hobbies that you enjoy doing with God. Maybe you really enjoy playing guitar and you want to spend time playing guitar with God. Maybe you really enjoy cooking or baking, so you want to do that with God. Or last thing I put was as little work as is reasonably possible. Reasonably kind of being the key word there.
I got a question.
Yeah.
So how these Pharisees are in the Bible, though? So the ones that don't believe in Jesus, they're still doing the Sabbath for this day right now?
Yes, no, they're still being very structured and regimented in how they are taking a Sabbath. Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. It seems counterintuitive, but that's what they're doing. So for most people, they might choose to celebrate Sabbath on a Sunday, but depending on maybe what your work schedule is, you might do it on Saturday, Monday. A lot of pastors take a Sabbath on a Monday because they were technically working on a Sunday. So any other questions up to this point? Okay, so let's move on to Exodus 28 to 11, if someone can read that. Just getting a history of the Sabbath here. Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. And whoever has that pulled up can give it a read. Yep. Perfect.
Okay. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath day of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy.
Awesome. Thank you. So, fun fact for you, this is actually the longest of the 10 commandments. That doesn't necessarily mean it's more important than all the others, but it means that there's a lot of nuances that might need some clarification. And so, yeah, this is the 5th commandment. And interestingly enough, it's the first commandment that is more so written with humans in mind than with God. And what I mean by that is the first 4 are how we treat God. We don't use the Lord's name in vain. We have no other gods before him. And then the 5th commandment is where things shift, and they're more so written for us, right? So we kind of have this, they're separated by this love God, love your neighbor sort of style, if that sounds a little bit familiar for you. So now, God doesn't just tell them not to do any work. That's not what he says here. He says, keep it holy. And what does holy mean? It means to be set apart with God, right? God wants the Sabbath to be a righteous event that lines up with his character, right? Similar to what we saw in his own creation. That's why, not to jump ahead of ourselves here, but Jesus is allowed to heal a man on the Sabbath because that is still an action that lines up with God's holiness, as opposed to inaction. Now, the commandment says that nobody is allowed to do work, but for a while, for like centuries actually, there was a debate as to what constituted work on the Sabbath. So what happened was there was a very long debate as to what the line was between work and everyday activity. So in this Hebrew text called the Mishnah, they compiled a bunch of regulations on what counted as work, and I'm going to give you a few of them here and see how this would affect your day-to-day on your Sabbath. You can't light a fire or kindle a fire on Shabbat, like we said. That's why Shabbat candles must be lit before sunset. You best hope that the wind doesn't blow them out. You also can't extinguish a flame, even to save oil or a lamp. Be careful. You may not cook or reheat food using direct heat once Shabbat begins. Tying up a musical instrument string that came loose would also be finishing a vessel, which you're not allowed to do. So if I was playing my guitar, playing some worship songs to God, I would not be allowed to tune my guitar. Writing 2 letters is forbidden because that would be enough to make a word. But one is okay. One is okay. You can't carry items from a private domain, like your home, to a public place, like the streets, or vice versa. Even passing through a doorway might be troublesome. Killing animals, even as pest control, is forbidden. Even swatting a fly could be troublesome. The one exception for this that we will see in, I cited it down. It's either in Numbers or Leviticus, my bad there. But you're allowed to sacrifice, the priests were allowed to sacrifice animals on the Sabbath. You can sow 1 seed, but any more than that is forbidden. You can't bring any food into your house because you would be harvesting it. Now, in technicality with those last 2, let's just say hypothetically, Sabbath started while you were holding your arm out of your kitchen window and you had a handful of seeds. You couldn't drop them because then you'd be planting and thus doing work. But you could also not bring your hand in because then you would be harvesting. So what do you do to make sure that you don't work and you have a restful Sabbath? Hold your hand out the window until Sabbath is over. Well, I guess if the birds eat it, then you know, it's God's providence right there. Yeah. I guess so. He takes care of the sparrows too. So Any thoughts or questions up to this point? I think we're all kind of seeing the.
God, we don't live there.
Yeah, well, yeah,
That's doesn't even make sense to me.
But they follow it here too.
yeah,
The Jews. started Jews.
yeah. It's of course more prominent in Israel, but like,
So
yeah,
they could, so preparing the meal.
that's work.
They prepare it ahead of time and it's already ready.
No, but that's what I'm saying though, like eating is emotion.
No, no,
Yeah,
that's recreational. Yeah,
Oh,
that's why they had this big debate. What counts as work? What doesn't? And so this is what they came to a conclusion on. Yeah,
It's in their club extra laws to keep protecting the club.
yeah. Yeah. So now that we, oh, yeah,
So if you filled your plate with food, would it not be work?
not according to them. They were pretty generous in coming to that conclusion. Yeah. So now that we have a history of the Sabbath, let's go back to Matthew 12. Now you might remember this section is following the section that we covered last week a little bit, where Jesus is discussing the burdensome yoke of the law and says, instead of yoking ourselves to the law, where he rebuked the Pharisees for doing that to the people, he says that we should yoke ourselves to him because his burden is easy, his yoke is light. We will find our rest in him. So reading the first couple verses, it says, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and eat. Yes. When the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. Now, by the Pharisees' standards, the disciples were doing work. But remember, this was their perception. Who do you think was having a more purposeful Sabbath as it was intended to be? Remember that the point of the Sabbath was to find rest and to enjoy your time with God. So who's having a better Sabbath? The disciples who are enjoying a snack with God himself, or the Pharisees who are supposedly finding rest by policing their unnecessary burdens on everyone that Jesus had just rebuked them for? I think we would all agree it's probably the disciples. So here's the thing. Rules and structures are good things to have when you want to protect something good. Right? Can we agree with that? Rules are good. But as soon as you have rules simply for the sake of having rules, and especially when they end up being more important than the very thing they were supposed to be protecting, that's legalism, and you forgot the point of even why you're doing it. Right? Are you following the Sabbath just so you can check a box? Or are you following the Sabbath so you can get closer to God? Right? Is this making sense? Because how many things do we do just because why not? It's for the sake of doing them. That's how we've always done them. But we don't actually think, what is the purpose behind this? Like, is this actually leading us closer to God, to God's vision for us? Or are we just doing it because why not?
Boils down to the letter of law versus the spirit of law.
Totally.
That applies, in this case, it applies to the legal system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Messed up.
Yep, I would agree with you. I would agree with you there. So, the Sabbath, going back to the Sabbath in particular, can someone read Mark 2:27? And so this is actually Mark's version of the same story that Matthew is telling right here. Mark 2, verse 27.
And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for himself.
Awesome.
The Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this is a rule that, of course, applies to the Sabbath, but to almost any rule that you seek to make, any structure, right? We are supposed to have Sabbath so that we can spend time with God, right? There was this rule in Bible college, and I will say it was a good rule, but for student housing, You could not have a guy in a girl's room. Very, yeah, fair enough, right? I think we can all see that. But if just hypothetically, if one of the girls in the house just collapsed out of whatever reason, should I just be like, wish I could do something, but I got rules to follow? No, like I should probably check and see if she's okay. Call an ambulance, right? How do I actually help her? Right? The rule was made for man, not yes, the rule was made for man, not man for the rule. Right? And that is something that we need to understand if we don't want to be legalistic. As soon as the rules are more important than what they seek to protect, that is legalism. So another example, imagine if in our church, we mandated that from the first worship song to the last, you all had to have your hands up, otherwise you're not actually worshiping God. First of all, you can worship in a lot of different postures. But what if I was leading worship and I see that Margie, she doesn't have her hands up, she's kneeling on the ground. And I stop the worship set and I say, Margie, stand up. Get off your knees. You're not worshiping properly. That's probably going to do more harm and it's going to be more of a distraction than if the rule even never existed. You understand? You know, but I wouldn't blame you.
You have to go hold her up like they did to Moses.
Yeah. Yeah, right?
Can I ask you one question on these rules for the Sabbath?
Sure.
So in the Bible, like I know there's all kinds of stuff, but God gave all these rules, laws to Moses and all these people, but he never wrote none of those to the Sabbath list that the Pharisees had, no, right?
The Mishnah? No, that is not canon. That is just what the Pharisees deemed to be work and what was not.
Okay, so when during the Bible, I don't recall, but was there any set stuff from God specifically about the Sabbath?
Yes, there was some things, but not nearly as extensive. Again, it was, I won't be able to give you an exhaustive list. But there was some things in like the Levitical priesthood that what was expected of who was doing what, so that some people could work, others could sacrifice animals. But it was faithful to what the point of the Sabbath was. And that was so that people could get closer to God, not for the sake of doing things. But yeah, good question.
I think it was also the spirit of the law. I think this whole Pharisee law started because God has set rest on the Sabbath. And people started pushing the limits, like how much can I do, how much can I do. The Pharisees answered and said, well, you can do this, you can't do that, you can do this. And so people are pushing the limits and seeing what they can get away with to avoid worshiping God on Sunday.
Yeah, well,
I think that's where it probably started from. And then there's like 300 rules.
612.
312, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty close, yeah. So I think that probably where it started. People
Yeah.
don't want to rest, they want to work on the Sabbath, they want to push it to see how far they can get.
It certainly could have been. Like I said, there's two camps of people who are doing Sabbath wrong. It's those who are simply doing it for the sake of doing it, and there are those who are completely neglecting it, like you're talking about now, who kind of just want to get away with it. But like this was a commandment. You know, I read in a actually I didn't read it. Someone else read it and told me about it. But this guy said in a book on Sabbath that if he was a pastor at a church, if he cheated on his wife, if he committed adultery, he would lose his job. If he denounced the faith, he would lose his job. You know, if he was caught stealing from the church, he would lose his job, and named all the other commandments, right? He said, if I did not take a Sabbath, I would get a pay raise, which is very interesting, right? But so it is like, but the Sabbath was made for us. And sometimes, yeah, we do want to get out of it because we want to be productive, quote unquote. But long term, the Sabbath is a gift that makes us have to pause, reflect, be with God, fill ourselves up for the rest of the week. How long can you actually go without taking a day off? You know, probably not that long.
They were exiled to Babylon for that very reason. They're not letting the
Yeah.
land rest. And
It is just as much of the Ten Commandments as the other ones. Yeah. Yeah.
How did they come up with the rules? Like, who came up with it?
Like the Mishnah?
Yeah.
It was the Jewish religious leaders. Yeah. So we as Christians, we believe that the Old Testament, of course, is inspired, but we don't believe that every Jewish text is. And the Mishnah is one of those that we don't take that. We don't follow that. Yeah. Right. We clear up to this point?
Some time ago, I thought about the Sabbath, and I thought it depends on what you're doing. Your day of rest can take different forms. For example, if you're an accountant all week long, well, it's great to get into the garden, dig weeds out and plant flowers, right? But if you're in industry, planting your arborist and working hard all week, well, you want to do some different kind of form of relax and drive.
Oh, sure.
Enjoy the lake, so
Yeah, totally.
you should do the opposite. And I sort of have a rule for myself. You can do whatever you want on Sunday, as soon as it starts feeling like work, quit.
Totally. And no, that's a perfect way to gauge it. But imagine if the Pharisees had that same logic. You know, as soon as holding your hand out the window starts to feel like work, maybe just bring it in.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. No, 100%. And I think that is a helpful rule. Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. Anyway, so going back to what Jesus responds to the Pharisees' accusation. Jesus answers back, and his first argument is a reference back to 1 Samuel 21, 1 verse 6. You don't have to flip there unless you want to for your own notes. But it's when David and his companions were fleeing from Saul, and they found themselves hungry. And they went to Ahimelech, who is the priest, and he let them eat some of the sacred bread, even though Leviticus 24, 5-9 says that only priests can eat this bread. All right? So the priest let them eat the priestly bread that was reserved for priests because they were hungry. So why was it okay for David to eat the bread and for the disciples to eat the grain? In the same way, am I allowed to always eat when I'm hungry? Or, by whatever means necessary?
So those, what kind of priests were they?
These were the priests. Like, these were Israel's priests.
So the ones that followed that rule.
Actually, I don't think the Mishnah was around at that time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't have knew any different then. If they didn't, if it wasn't around at that time, then there wouldn't have been those rules then.
But the Pharisees, and like they still didn't like compromising on these things. And even then, it's the disciples ate the grain, and the Mishnah was established by this time. Remember what?
Was the bread not consecrated and the Levitical priests were the ones who were able to eat it? So anybody else who was not a priest could not eat it. So David and men were not priests. That's why
So
their eating it was seen as wrong. But same as Jesus healed somebody on the Sabbath, it's for the benefit of God's people.
yes, you're definitely hitting it on the head there. Yeah, the Levitical law states that anybody who wasn't a priest wasn't allowed to eat the bread, right? The restrictions that were put in place against them had something different in mind in how they would be violated. You know what I mean? Starving men eating the priestly bread is not the same as someone simply pigging out on it, right? They're not one of the, yeah, you're still eating, but that's not the same. And hungry men having a handful of grain is not violating the original purpose of having a day of rest. So Jesus references this. Jesus' second example is in reference to Numbers 28, 9-10, where it talks to, as we talked about earlier, where it talks of how priests have to do work in the form of sacrifices on the Sabbath. Again, you don't have to turn there unless you want to for your own notes. But yeah, priests were allowed to sacrifice animals on the Sabbath, but nobody else was allowed to kill an animal, right? So this is what Jesus says to them. He says, they were technically doing work on the Sabbath. Why do they get an exemption? So now, all that being said, Jesus was not of Levitical priestly lineage, nor is there any evidence that his life was in danger or that his needs were nearly as urgent as David's, right? So David needed it because he was escaping Saul and his men were hungry. It's not in the case with Jesus and the disciples. And Jesus is not of the line of Aaron. So what is Jesus' main reason in referencing the two stories that relate to priesthood? Key word there being priesthood. He gives you a hint later on in the section there. But why does he mention two stories that relate to priesthood? Sure, yeah, definitely on the right track there. What does the text say?
Jesus is actually our high priest.
Yes, yeah, Jesus would be our high priest. But we're definitely on the right track here. What does he say in verse 6? We're 90% there.
Verse 6.
Matthew 12. I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. So the priests were there, whether they were sacrificing animals or eating the bread, they were there for the sake of the temple. Something greater than the temple is here, right? So the reason that they get exemptions, Jesus is greater than the temple. He can give out exemptions. So yeah, he's trying to show that exemptions to adhere to specific laws have been given.
Well, he's our new temple, right? He's the temple.
Yeah. Yes. Not at this point. Well, yes. Yeah.
The Pharisee.
No.
So he's the temple more after the resurrection.
Greater even. But yeah. Yeah. So Jesus says he is greater than the temple. So just as the priests were able to give exemptions or get exemptions, he can too. So it isn't then the particular situation that Jesus and the disciples find themselves in that justify the disciples' behavior like it did with David and the priests, but it's Jesus's very nature and authority over the Sabbath, which can transcend the law and make permissible for his disciples what was once forbidden. Does that make sense? Because that is his nature. He created the Sabbath. He took the first Sabbath. So how do you guys feel about that? Do you wrestle with the idea of God allowing exemptions from the law in certain situations?
If you read 11 and 12, he uses the illustration about if your sheep fell into the well, you go to work and make money.
Mm-hmm.
And then he sums it up. Yes, it is right to do good on the Sabbath.
Yeah, good thought.
Well, in that same section that we read, in verse 7, it said, Jesus says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice.
Mm.
And I think the Pharisees worked hard to make the law greater than being compassionate.
Totally. They idolized the law at a cost of being compassionate. Yeah, 100%.
So I think both the Pharisees, I'll use only Jesus, because that's what I can forget. I always used to hear about Jesus, how God took a rest on Sunday, and I go, And that always bothered me, because I thought, well, God's never tired, he never sleeps, so why would he need to rest?
Mhm.
But then when I hear this, so in the Pharisees' eyes, do they think that God was tired then and he needed to rest? You know what I'm
Probably
saying?
not. I think they probably would have had this understanding, but the Pharisees loved rules. They loved being quote unquote righteous, in their own eyes.
We see it as God sitting back and enjoying what he did. Do you think they see it in that way?
For God's Sabbath,
For the Pharisees, that we, as Christians, we see God sitting back and saying, well, I'm taking a day to enjoy what my creation is. Do you think the Pharisees sees God do it?
probably, because that is where their definition of rest comes, because they don't just read it as rest, they read it as to cease work and to enjoy, right? So yeah. So yeah, any other ideas on God allowing exemptions from the law in certain situations? Is there a line to this? Is there any law that God will not exempt? You don't think so? You would. What would you say? Yeah, fair enough. So actually, I'll share this idea. In Christian ethics, there's this idea of people are trying to figure out what is the right ethic to treat things from. The one that I would subscribe to is this idea called graded absolutism. You don't, feel free to look into it yourself. But basically, what graded absolutism says is there are, of course, sins that are always sin, right? It doesn't matter what you do them for. Sin is sin. But when you have two sins come together and you have to make a decision, which sin takes precedence to commit or to not? For example, you're in Nazi Germany, somebody knocks on your door and says, are there Jews in your basement? Do you lie or do you hand the Jews over? What is your responsibility? And a graded absolutist would say, well, you have a greater responsibility to protect life than you do to tell the truth. Now, you might also, maybe that you don't quite agree with that, but Jesus in his trial, he was met with a ethical dilemma as well, where he could die for the people, giving grace to us all, and save us. But by doing that, he would have to allow others to commit deicide, which is a sin. You're overturning the laws of the universe in doing so. Does that make sense? By allowing God to die, you're committing deicide. So what does he choose to do? Well, he chooses to do what is the greater moral responsibility in dying for us.
So he laid down his life.
Yeah, willingly.
Meaning that were they really killing him, or was he laying down his life? And
He still allowed them to kill him, right? And even if you want to call it suicide, which I wouldn't.
No.
And I know that's not what you're saying. He was still met with a moral dilemma. And so there are, at times, responsibilities that we have to choose essentially the lesser of two evils. It's not that we don't have the exception. It's that we're exempt just for that instance because there's a greater sin that we don't want to commit. Right? That's why Rahab lied.
That's what I was just gonna say.
Yeah, Rahab lied. But what does the Bible say? It commends her for lying.
We talked about that.
You did? Yeah, okay.
We
I
talked
was
about
just
it.
coming out of my mouth.
And the lie was not a lie because she had already made a covenant with the Israelites. So if she would have told them about the two spies, that would be a betrayal to the covenant that she made to the men.
Yeah, and so yeah, Rahab was met. Do I honor my covenant or do I tell the truth?
And it would mean her whole family.
Yeah, and so there's a scale, I suppose, in that we have first an obligation to God, then to our fellow man, and then to everything else.
Coming back to your example, the one situation.
Yeah.
The girl passes out and you're standing there and you see it. If you come back to Matthew 12, Jesus would rather you be compassionate than follow a law like that.
Sure. Yeah, it takes
Not
precedence.
to go in there and there wasn't really a need for you to go in and invoke that law, there'd be a consequence for that.
Yeah.
But when someone is ill and passes out and you need to help them, he wants us to consider being compassionate and merciful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Any last thoughts before we move on here?
So it's kind of like you're allowed to lie to the devil.
Suppose so. Yeah, I might have to break that one down later, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the Nazis come to grab Jews and kill them. Yeah, sure.
yeah. Johan, you got something to say there?
All right, I'm just gonna do it. In James 2:10, it says that all evil is equal, that there's no greater evil, that you commit one kind of evil or more.
Yeah. James 2:10. So actually, I did write a paper on this about a year ago. I'm trying to read it again.
Oh, okay. So there's, whoever keeps the whole law, his son or just no friends goes to
Yeah, but here's the thing. First of all, we have already broken the whole law. It's not that God. It's not that we have an exception to sin. It's that we are exempt in that moment because there is a greater moral obligation, right? So God doesn't see it as sin. Otherwise, we have to say that Jesus sinned. And I'm not comfortable saying that. Yeah.
I think so what does he want us to do more? It's not just like we're breaking the law, this or that. Like, it's like, what does he want us to do?
Yeah.
We what we need to follow because again, we can say so. We have more. We have an obligation to follow.
For sure.
About everything else, whatever he wanted us to do, that's what we have to do, regardless of what the morality here on.
Yeah, and it's not that morality is relative, right? We are still using a concrete code for it, but it's just that at certain times, different laws apply at different times. Sure.
But opposing or opposing, it's which one is morally what?
Sure.
Or in the hierarchy, you mentioned God first, people next, and then everything else. Well,
Yeah. Yeah, we have tons of examples. Ehud. He killed an evil king because God told him to. It had a greater effect. Anyway, let's move on here. We're going down a little bit of a rabbit hole. Yeah, sparks some good discussion. So the third argument repeats a reference Jesus already used in Matthew 9:13 that we've already talked about a little bit. And it's a reference to Hosea 6:6 saying, "For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." So in saying this, Jesus is not trying to downplay or do away with observing the ceremonies, but rather to establish God's order of priorities, right? God cannot be quoted in support of the attitude which condemns before it understands. That wouldn't be just, nor would it be merciful. By this standard, Jesus, as God, deems the disciples as guiltless for eating, and then says that he is Lord of the Sabbath, and Jesus can essentially do what he wants with it. He is Lord of the Sabbath. It belongs to him. So let's go to the next scene here. He went on from there and entered their synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" So that they might accuse him. First of all, I love the unwaveringness of Jesus to just ignore how the Pharisees were pressing him. After they pry, and he answers, and he just says, he went on from there and entered their synagogue. I just find that kind of funny. He said to them, which of you who has a sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? Right? Again, this is a work. Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. It is lawful. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And the man stretched it out, and he was restored, healthy like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him to destroy him or to kill him. Now, first, it's so interesting that the Pharisees get mad at him for supposedly disobeying the Sabbath, one of the 10 commandments. And so what do they do in response is plot to kill him, also breaking one of the 10 commandments. They do not have a moral exemption here.
I get a kick out of Jesus. It seems like all these good miracles he pulls off, he waits till the Sabbath. Even the blind guy because every time I read a story, I always laugh. I go, Jesus is gonna rub it in a little more to them. And then they show up and they go, I don't care that you're healed, but you know what? It's the Sabbath. Like, they forget about all the healing, they forget about everything. They just care about the day it was on.
100%.
Like
Their priorities are out of whack.
yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It's like, Jesus, okay, it's Sunday, I'm doing something, I'm gonna rile these boys up.
Yeah, well, no, that is a very interesting thought that this is next in my notes here. Why did Jesus heal the man on the Sabbath? Right, the man in question, he had this shriveled hand, and this is probably something that has been affecting him for a very long time. In other words, the man's life was not in immediate jeopardy. Jesus could have waited one more day. He could have, right? But he heals it on the Sabbath. And again, it is interesting to note, kind of as you said, Ray, they don't even seem to question Jesus' ability to perform the miracle. They don't say, can you heal on the Sabbath? Or, are you able to? So is it lawful to? They seem to believe Jesus can heal. But they're for whatever reason, they're not questioning that, and they're just questioning, why are you doing it on the Sabbath? Yeah, 100%. And maybe it is in some way just to, rile them up, get them mad, get them at least thinking. He's challenging them.
Because they know he's gonna do it. They just hate the day he does it on.
Yeah. Well, they hate him in general, but
Oh, yeah. But
yeah, I hear you. So,
He wanted to show them who he is. He's revealing his God, like the whole miracle on Sunday.
totally.
They were open, not so much minded, then they say, oh, okay, what's the lesson here? He's greater than Sabbath. Oh, I'm learning something. They're learning about.
Totally. Well, and that's why we say in verse 8 there, Jesus does say, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. He is doing what he is doing, saying that certain things are lawful on the Sabbath because the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Right? So he's 100% trying to show who he is here. Yeah.
I think that's what happens to us too, like in our own lives. If we're so close-minded and we're not resistant to what God is doing in our lives, we can just pass it by. Not
Sure.
learning the lesson, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's why it is important to, just as God reflected on what he did, we're supposed to reflect on what God has been doing the last 6 days. Yeah, 100%. So they ask him, they challenge him. Now, when Jesus answers them, instead of proclaiming his authority as the Son of Man, as he had just did, he instead draws a parallel between a sheep that falls into a pit to demonstrate the inconsistency in their own way of thinking. Essentially, they would not perform work in healing another human on the Sabbath, but if it was your own property, they would go and compromise the Sabbath by doing work to rescue the sheep. And by saying this, Jesus is pointing out how the priorities of the Pharisees are all wrong. Right? Are we seeing this? Essentially, the Sabbath is a tool for us to find rest and to even heal ourselves, so to speak. You know, just as Jesus healed the man on the Sabbath, that's where we find our rest. That's where we recuperate. That's where we're healed more than any of the other days. That's what the day is intentionally designed for.
Well, that lady that was bound for 18 years too, you know, when he used her, that's a good, because, you know, if you just think how much pain she was in for 18 years and he loosed her from all that, you know what I'm saying?
For sure.
And now he tried getting that through to them, you know, but she was freedom on that Sabbath, actually.
Yeah, but they don't care about the miracle, right? They want things done in their structure. They don't recognize Jesus. They aren't operating on logic at all throughout the Gospels. Their priorities are out of whack. They're not thinking critically. They're thinking with their own interests in mind. But so yeah, Jesus goes. He heals the man, and they want to go and kill him. So what was I here? Sorry. So yeah, the Sabbath is a tool for us to find rest and to heal ourselves, but not to the exclusion of doing good, right? We still have somewhat of an obligation to do good. Why do I say somewhat? Right? You kind of asked this earlier. Can we go and help others on the Sabbath? Yes. So I would say sometimes, but I think there's a line to walk. There are always going to be people to take care of, no matter what the day. I'm not saying we push them to the side. Don't hear me on that. But if we designate our Sabbath to helping them, the point of the Sabbath would be rendered to nothing. Because it is work, right? Now, in saying that, if we're it's Sunday, we're driving to church, and we see somebody on 97th Street, you know, it's not going to kill us to hand them a $5 bill. We're not going to be compromising on our rest, you know. We still have a moral obligation to do good. The Sabbath isn't there to exclude us from doing good. But should I designate every single Sunday to, building homes for the homeless? Probably not. Because you are going to burn yourself out. You're not honoring the Sabbath. It is a great thing that you are doing, but you're not honoring the Sabbath as keeping it holy, and you're not doing what it was intended to do. God could have kept doing things on the Sabbath.
So I'm driving down the Torrey Trail last week. There's an old lady in her 60s. And she happened, for no reason, to cut across a walkway full of mud.
Okay.
She was stuck in her feet with mud and a walker. And I stopped and pulled her out. I don't know how many people drove by, but I stopped and pulled her out. And, I was just thinking what you were saying. So basically, a Pharisee wouldn't have stopped and pulled her out.
Might depend on the Pharisee, but yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that was work though, right?
That was helping with the Good Samaritan too, is that they were on their way to the temple and some unclean were stopping to help the man that was being up. And I mean, logically, you shouldn't stop and it would make you unclean as a Pharisee because then you have to go through all ritualistic purification in order to go to the temple to make the sacrifices in the temple. So that's why they would not help the Samaritan or help the man that was injured. But the Samaritan, he didn't have that ritualistic cleansing purification.
Totally.
So he was able to touch the man and it wasn't making him unclean and it wasn't a dirty thing to him.
Yeah, well, and even going back to Hosea 6:6 there, and back to Matthew 12, it's in there, right? I would rather have compassion than you just follow this list of ceremonial observations just for the sake of it, at the cost of compassion. People take precedence, right? But in saying that we do need to look after ourselves. And there is a line to walk. How much work is too much work? Should I be going out of my way to seek help people? Or maybe I just trust that by the sovereignty of God, if there is somebody who I need to heal, there they will be.
I think we need to sometimes not feel guilty about resting.
Totally.
We said, society's got some that we going 24/7, that God has given us permission to rest.
100%.
And we need
Not only permission, he's commanded us to.
command us.
But I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and so when you rest, you need to rest because, right, remember not to be done. And that's where we have to balance, our good works and our helping others and to be good with our own kind of, status and because we aren't able to do anything for anybody for, flat out.
Yeah. No, exactly. Right? Jesus took time to rest, but he also healed on the Sabbath. Right? And so he calls us to do the same. Right? That's what he says right before. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Yeah, the Pharisees wanted people to do. Jesus just says, just find some rest.
I think God wants us to actually learn to depend on him too for a day of stuff. Because when you look at the manna, he didn't pour any down on Sunday. He made a fast so they didn't have to go out. And I think on that day of rest too, not that we can't have a steak or something, but I think God wants us to depend on him for that day of rest, like our needs will be met.
Mhm.
Having us to go not have a rest. You know what I'm saying?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So Jesus is not encouraging the Jews to stop worshiping God on the Sabbath, right? He's in the synagogue and he's healing. He is not telling the Jews to stop worshiping God and go and do good things necessarily, but he's showing them that sometimes we do need to move. There are things to do. If your rule that you are structuring your life with, your Sabbath, your prayer life, whatever it is, if your rule is consistently restricting others from experiencing the freedom and the rest of Jesus, it's a bad rule, and you might need to rethink it. Remember, there was a lot of rules that restricted people from finding the freedom and rest in Jesus, and Jesus shut it down, right? And so I encourage you guys today, your systems and your practices, are they helping you find rest in Jesus? Are they actually getting in the way of you experiencing his freedom? You might have to actually reflect on that. Do you have any to begin with? There are sometimes good things to keep ourselves accountable. For myself, I put an alarm on my phone to remind me to do spiritual disciplines. Otherwise, I might just forget. Have you become legalistic in elevating any rules in your life to the point that they've nullified the very reason you started them in the first place? And similarly, are there any of your rules or convictions getting in the way of having others experience Christ? Because you're sharing a yoke of legalism. If somebody was to come into this church, kind of like Margie said, if I mandated that everybody had their hands up during worship and I called her out, she would never come back if she was a new believer. A huge part of the reason Matthew actually writes his gospel is to show that there's an invitation to all to be part of God's kingdom. Remember, we talked last week about what Emmanuel means, God with us, and how Matthew's sprinkling this idea of Emmanuel all throughout his gospel, from beginning all the way to the end. The Great Commission, right? Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey all that I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the end of the age. He's with us. and he invites everybody to come. And so that's why he dismantles this burdensome system that the Pharisees had up, so others could actually come into God's kingdom. So why would we ever put more restrictions up? We don't need a 613th law. You know, we don't need another Mishnah. We don't need to put any yoke on a new believer that isn't the necessity of the belief in the gospel to let them in. Are we hearing that? The only thing that matters, are you believing in the true Jesus Christ? And then everything else from there comes. Right? So that's what I would challenge us with today. And so just one last question, because we only have a couple minutes before we close here. Whether you share it or not, that's up to you. What would be a good and a restful Sabbath? What would that look like for you? Right? We've talked about what the purpose of Sabbath initially was, and then what it wasn't. So for your context, for your lifestyle, what would a good and a restful Sabbath look like for you? Yeah.
For me, it'd be taking a day off of the guilt and shame for my past and worshiping and being with Jesus and thanking him for who he was and for his grace. Because I think that's a burden for me that I carry all week. And I think if I could take a day off of speaking with God and feeling free with being with him, spending time and knowing just he loves me for the way I am, I think that'd be a great Sabbath for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. For myself, on a Sunday, I'd like to go to church, come home, have a 2-hour nap, right? Maybe go on a walk with Macy. That's not true, but I know she likes it. I was gonna say, and then watch primetime football. I would love that.
Oh, yes. Sunday all day, 3 hours.
Yeah. No.
Well, I just think God made us human. We have to look after our bodies. Now, if you worked 24 hours a day, your body would collapse. So God designed us that we should get, 8 hours sleep a night, so we'll have strength for the next day. But it's the same with the Sabbath. You work 7 days, you take the 7th off, so that the body can regenerate a lot of the cells. So you'll have strength to start the next day.
Exactly.
I can remember back in the farm, we had horses, my dad used to do a lot of them. But we never worked on Sundays. And I can remember taking down the pasture field, take the bridles off, and they would take off bucking and running. But at supper time, no, they were back up looking for their supper.
Yeah. Well, that's, you know what? It is a big deal if a farmer takes a Sabbath. You know, it's a full-time job, to say the least.
The horses.
Yeah. Yeah. Any last thoughts? Whether you share it or not, guys, I encourage you to take some time, reflect. What do you enjoy inviting God into? For me, I like to watch football, and I do sometimes. I often bring God into that, and just yeah. It sounds kind of funny, but I watch football with God sometimes.
Are a different team than me.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, take some time, think about that. Would anyone like to volunteer to close in prayer?
I have a praise report, I forgot.
Sure.
You want anyone who's here or even watching on Sunday online, we prayed for Bernard. He had his surgery on Monday, and anyone who's not on Pastor Naomi's email list, he came through the surgery very well. And Jonathan and Naomi went up to see him Monday night and prayed with him. And even the doctors are really pleased with how well he came through the surgery. And their word to us is thank you so much for praying. Praise the Lord.
Yeah.
Really, already it's possible, it might be sending your home today.
Wow. Wow.
It's not coming on, you should probably build website, yeah, that's such good news, I was so happy.
Yeah. Oh, that's a miracle.
It is.
Yeah.
You made me turn my phone on this morning. I actually got a text on Monday, late afternoon, thinking about Bernard, and we were just coming out of his room. And Jonathan texted me, he said, Naomi's gonna send out a text yet tonight, so.
Yeah. That's awesome. Praise God.
Oh, praise God.
Yeah. Johan, would you like to close in prayer? Amen. Have a good rest of your week, guys. Be blessed as you leave.